Okay. So this is a take two. Apparently my sound was not working, which is a pretty regular thing. So the first thing we're going to do is encase my opal. Awesome. Glad to hear it. Okay. So for the third time, since I've now said this twice, so today I'm going to be working on projects for virtual art shows in Chicagoland. When I was working in Chicago, we did a lot of art shows through a company called Amder Productions, run by Amy Amder. And due to the whole COVID thing, she has decided to run some virtual art shows. And yeah, so today we're going to be working on projects to be on display and for sale at those shows. So the first thing we're going to be doing, it's going to be a lot of marbles. Whenever, especially in Chicago, that's kind of what I built my name on. That's what everyone who knows who I am knows me for, at least in the art show end of things. So that is what we are bringing back to Chicagoland. So first thing I did was opal. Go ahead and encase it, drop it down the tube, slowly work all the air out, and make sure it's encased completely with no air bubbles. Thank you, JJ. So now we're going to attach it to our clear rod that is going to act as the lens at the end of our project. This first one that we're doing today is going to be a 1-incher. And if I have time, which based on the fact that I don't think I've ever actually completed a stream all the way to 7, I will probably have time. We're going to do a couple 2-inch marbles as well. So I want to attach this as centered as possible and make sure that I don't have any kind of seams or weirdness. And then we're going to go ahead and take it off the tube. Okay, so for those of you who have seen me do vortex marbles before, you know how important the cone is. For those of you who have not, the next big step is I have to create a cone that's going to end up being the basis of the work that I do on the piece. So I don't want that opal to be a part of the cone. I want the cone to be below the opal. That way that the opal sits comfortably right on the edge of the lens and is nice and prominent and in the foreground of the final piece. So we will be taking some 6mm clear rod and actually adding a chunk of glass to the bottom of this. That is going to act as that little cone that we do all of our work on. All right, so got our blob. Go ahead and cone it out. As always, short and fat is the way to go. And then we will find my little saw blade tool that, of course, I didn't bother to find ahead of time. Someday I'll just put things in one place, like my parents have been telling me since I was 6. There it is. Okay. So now X-Acto knife. What this is doing is it's going to just create some divots so that there's some strategic air bubbles in the vortex marble. Strategic air bubbles are okay. Accidental air bubbles are not. That's how that works. All right, so now we're going to fume it. I do not see any fume laying around, so we're going to make some of that. So we're going to keep our piece nice and preheated while we're doing this, mostly because of the opal. I don't want that thing to decide to explode. Explosions are usually bad. All right, so now we got a little piece of silver on the end of my rod. Change the flame so it goes down to fuming size, which for silver is super tiny. Fume the whole thing. So it's, I don't know if you can see, but it's got kind of a yellow on it on the outside now. There we are. Gonna grab some real light cobalt, and we want to melt down just over the actual bubbles and everything. And it's Zach and Jake are playing a game of Warhammer. So hit here, go right down one side, and since I only put bubbles on about a third of the piece, only about a third of the cone is going to be getting covered with the blue. Thanks for taking care of the Amder promotion there, Ma. All right. So now we're going to focus our heat a little bit on the clear section. If you hit it with a high enough flame, most of the time your fume will actually burn away. And so we want to do that. We want to burn away the fume on the rest of the piece so that the only place that there is fume is encased under that blue. And now we are going to spin our cone. We're focusing our heat on the thick spot, not the thin spot. The thin spot will just get hot on its own because it's tiny. And just rotate your cone, making sure that, one hand stays a little bit less, is moving a little bit less than the other so that everything actually spirals properly. Do you cover in lines like the divots or total? I am not quite sure what you're asking. If you're asking where do I put the lines of color, yeah, it's just over the divots. You don't want to do the whole thing. That way, that's what kind of creates, I don't know if you, well, I know my mom has seen them, but when you look at the vortex marbles I make, you'll see there's kind of that, in the center of it, that swirl of blue with other color around it. That is what I'm doing when I'm putting the blue lines down. The rest of the vortex, that's all clear and you can see through, I'm getting by not doing that. However, when I do like a dichro vortex, you can sometimes cover the whole thing. It gives you a slightly different look. But for the look for this marbles, I only want to cover the divots to put my strategic blue holes. Okay. All right, so now all right, so what I did prior to this whole project is I took some amber purple and put it over some blue caramel, and then I heated it up and twisted it up so it was all angsty and had angles and everything, and then you throw it in the water, and that shatters and explodes, and then I take little chunks of that and I use them and I place it on the marble so that it creates these like shelves, which is why I call these sea cave marbles. So I'm taking two of them and just picking them up. And then I want to not necessarily heat them up all the way before I start to press them in. That way you get this kind of random, almost rocky jutting of color into the middle of your vortex. And between every step, we have to cone it out. Make sure it comes down to a nice point. All right, so next we're going to cover the outside of our cone with frit. We're going to do this a few times, and this kind of seals the project, and then you'll also see that from the inside as like little coral bloom kind of stuff in the background. So what I did is I took some blue moon frit and some purple luster frit, mix them together, and now we're just going to roll the outside of our cone in that frit. And then get it in the flame, melt it in a little bit, get your piece nice and hot, and do it again. And you always want to make sure that you go to and do dead on and make sure you get the very tip of your cone. I've accidentally left that open and not done that, and it looks ridiculous in the final piece. All right. I'm going to heat it up and roll it in the frit one more time just because I want more frit. All right. So now we've got the right amount of frit. Now it's completely covered. We're going to cone it real hard because this is the last time you truly cone your piece. So we want to make sure that that vortex looks exactly how I want it to look. And then we will cover our marble. So first thing we're doing, I'm going to take the black. I guess I'm using Raven. You start thin and move thick. So when I first attach this to the outside rim, I want to rotate quickly and I want to leave a pretty thin line because that's the outer rim of our cone. And then as I move towards the skinnier end, I want to leave the glass thicker and thicker so that what I'm effectively doing is creating a buffer for when I marble this whole thing out to where my cone will be stuck under a ton of outer glass, and so it can maintain the cone shape real nicely inside your piece rather than the cone marbling out and you losing your vortex effect. Just like that. All right. So first thing we're going to do is we're going to marble out the back of this piece, and then I'm going to add on my back pattern. So we're going to do kind of a starburst pattern on the back of this one. This was really the first pattern that I did as one of the back patterns on my Vortex marbles, and it looks awesome, so I still do it. So I want to get rid of some of the texture and make sure that it's actually smooth. Otherwise, sometimes, you'll put a stringer and it'll go into the little slit, and then you got a thinning spot and it doesn't look as good. So always take your time to ensure that every step is proper, especially when you're doing things like a marble or something that is specific for an art show. Make it look good. All right, so now I'm going to take these stringers. I want to make sure that it's an pretty even thickness, and I'm going to run a line all the way around. I kind of use the edge of the piece as a guide, like the edge of the black. And then we'll do another one. Now I'm using the edge of the last stringer as a guide. And then next. And so the colors that I'm using are Skyline, which is a bluish purple, a real light purple, and then a dark purple, which is purple urple. And then I'm using opaque aqua, and then I'm using blue spruce, and I'll probably then repeat that pattern as much as I can for the rest of them. That way I have this nice kind of blue thing going on. All right, so it looks like the Skyline is as far as we're going to get, which is fine. Going to melt these in a little bit. They don't need to be completely melted in. They can still have some texture because I'm going to be doing a whole lot of manipulating of the color. So that's pretty good. Take our tungsten pick. Heat up along the line. Make sure that the piece along that line is heated from top to bottom. And then go ahead and stick the pick in at the top, drag all the way down, like that. And then we're going to go all the way around the piece and do that same thing. You want to make sure when you're doing this, you're careful to pay attention to when you're getting close to the end so that you can evenly space your last two holes. Otherwise, your star looks kind of weird when like everything's evenly spaced and then the last one's like a little short. Last one. You also want to be careful not to dig too deep into your glass because if you mess up your cone doing this, there's obviously no fixing it at this point. Okay, so now we've got our pattern in there. So we're going to melt this in, melt the whole thing down, and then we'll start pushing in our lens. But at this point, you want to make sure that you get the half that we've already created completely melted in, all ridges gone and everything. All right, so as I've done on projects before, since the very back of this piece is going to be black, and in order to not leave a little bit of clear left over on the bottom of the piece, I'm going to take some black, put it on the edge of my clear, and so that my stringer, or not stringer, my handle that I use when I put my lens on will be black. Same as the back of my piece. It's not perfectly straight, so I'm going to straighten it out a little bit before I start putting the lens on, make my life easier. Yeah, that's better. All right. And then also straighten my handle. Again, make my life easier. Touch the two, make it a cold seal, and then start heating up the lens. Now remember, I want to focus my initial heat kind of on that spot where the clear meets color, because I don't want that to rim over. I want it to kind of push the color out and then gradually like join it. If you just push in right away, you can create a crease that's impossible to get rid of, and it will make your piece look crappy, for lack of a better term. It shrinks your viewing angle and your viewing port for the vortex. And you know, if I had a piece to show you, would immediately look at it and be like, oh yeah, okay, I know what you're talking about. But it's a little hard to explain. So all I'm doing is just spending my time gathering clear. Rule of thumb, at least 50% of your marble should be lens. And I'm kind of going for a 2/3 thing here. I'm also basically just trying to increase it until it's right around 1 inch. That's the goal for the first couple marbles in our set today. And that's kind of the size of my standard marbles that I make. All right, that should be pretty good, I think. Tap off our back handle. Now I want to gather the whole thing up and run it through the marble mold to get it down to like the nice marble shape that we're looking for. A little hot out here today. Okay, so that kind of cupped the clear over, so we want to make sure we melt that bottom section of the marble rather than the top, so that it will evenly space itself out. Run it through the marble mold again, a little bit more forcefully this time, since it's pretty much round. So I just kind of want to force it to be marble. All right, we're good. Last time through, and then we're going to add a handle to the bottom and take off our big thick lens handle. All right. Using our handle with the black tip again. And now we'll just go ahead and hit this spot. The marble's the right size. I don't want to increase the size really. So we're going to hit this spot right where it starts to be a marble and melt off our handle. Now we're going to have a little bleb that's left over. Get rid of that. Now I get to look and see if the marble is actually a vortex. And it definitely is. Even a really nice one. All right. So now I just want to get that little, it's called a bleb, the little bleb on the end to melt in. So take some time. I don't want to smush it in. That will end up scarring the lens. So you'll have like a little, it's like a ghost line. You'll just kind of sort of see it a little bit. So you want to melt this in heavily before you put it back into the mold. That way you don't end up with that little line in your lens, especially because it's going to be right in the center and it would look horrible. All right. Looking good, looking good. Change the axis. All right, so now that the axis has been changed, we're just going to make sure that that spot on the back where I kept attaching the handle with the black tip is nice and melted in. It'll have a tendency to either divot or have a crack there. You want to make sure that that goes away. And now we want to take the piece off. So we're going to go from our 6 mil handle down to a 4 mil handle. I want to make sure that a 4 mil handle is super weak, which is why I'm also holding it up like this to minimize the amount of stress I'm putting on the handle. Right now, I just want to hit that spot where that last handle was and melt that in. I do not want any heat to make its way up to my new 4 mil handle because A, I don't want it to start moving, and B, I don't want it to adhere to my glass any more than it already has. That way, when I tap it off, it'll be real easy to do so. So we just rotate this in the mold to make sure that last spot from the 6 mil handle is all melted in. Always hit it in the flame after you go through the mold so you don't get any cold creases. Now we're going to wait for a second for it to cool, and then we'll tap it off. Yeah, so if you're asking how I make sure I know which lines of color are going where and how to guide them and all that, yeah, it's literally just I've screwed up probably 100 of these. All right, so once you tap that off, hit the spot at the base where that handle was, and you're all set. All right. So, see if we can get it in camera view at all. A little bit, not much. So, as always, I'll have pictures of all of these up on my Facebook at Vulcan Glass Art Studio, and then up on my Instagram at Vulcan Glass Art. So you can get good views of all of these tomorrow, because I know that the what these actually look like in the webcam is like not valuable. Also, since these are products that are going to be going up on the Amy Andrews show, I will put up on my Facebook whenever that show is and when I'm entering. If you guys want to take a look at that, as well as a whole bunch of other awesome, I would say Chicagoland artists, but usually worldwide artists, with a little bit of an emphasis on Chicago. Yeah, you can check those out, and a lot of great artists out there. Okay, so next project. This is also going to be a Vortex marble. However, I'm going to do a different backing to it. I'm going to do my kind of nebula swirl backing. So, yeah, first few like steps of the process are going to be the same, but then it will change. And I also have to find my, there it is, find my tube. Okay, so again, first thing we're going to do is we are going to go ahead and encase an opal. I'll get there. So we get our tube prepped, grab an opal. Find my opal tweezers. There they are. That one was giving me trouble. So what I'm doing is taking the opal and dropping it down the tube. Yeah, you can kind of see it in there. So we start heating at the bottom below the opal. Make sure that that little point at the end of our tube gets nice and hot. Then we let the opal go down and touch it. That'll secure it. It'll now stay there. I want to now bring the heat. So if you have the opal here, you want to start here and slowly bring your heat up and around. And that way you don't trap any air bubbles in your encasement process. It's really difficult to do. You have to maintain a really good heat base and be careful with your flame control, because you can also just push the opal up. Like if you don't actually let it go around the opal, it'll just keep pushing it up the tube, and then you never encased it. So you got to avoid that as well. This one's trying to do that really bad. Oh, there we go. Now I got it. And then I always just kind of suck in a little bit at the very end, and that gets the last little bit of air off the top of the opal. So now we're going to attach that to our 14, 12 something millimeter clear rod that's going to act as the lens. Remember to make sure you get these two nice and hot so that when they touch, there's no little visible seam. There's nothing weird that's going to distort the way you're viewing the piece. All right. Let that cool for a second, then we'll take off the tube handle. Tube handle removed. And now we have to add our cone. So same as when we're adding our opal, make sure both pieces are nice and hot so you don't create any kind of visual issues. And then just slowly gather onto the bottom of your piece what's going to be your cone. All right, that's pretty good. So, blob, end of piece, melt off, 6 mil, like that. Got like that. Now you want to heat it up. We're going to cone it out. Want to make sure that cone is nice and short and fat. Short and fat. Grab our saw blade and put in our bubble dents. Intentional bubbles are awesome. Accidental bubbles are terrible. Now I'm going to fume the outside of the thing. When I do this, since this time the silver is already in the rod and I don't want it to pop off, I kind of bounce it in the flame like this, and that slowly gets it heated up. Because if you just stick it in the flame, the glass is going to pop and you're going to lose your silver. Silver's not as bad as gold. I've probably lost like $60, $70 worth of gold over the course of my career from it just like popping off the end, and now it's there. It's places. So yeah, that's to be avoided when possible. All right. So now we're going to encase that right over the bubbles with our blue. We're using a nice light blue so that it will not obscure the upper angles of the cone of the vortex will not obscure the lower ones. Take a second to burn off the excess silver fume that you'll have on the clear section of your piece. And now focus your heat on the thick spot, and we are going to twist this. Focus on the thick spot. Thin spot will do its own job. The trick here is you also don't want to not cone it, you don't want to twist it too much. If you do that, especially at the bottom, you can obscure your vortex, because rather than it just coming down to a nice point at the end, it kind of just like, wah, and goes crazy. So you don't want to do that. And I did that a little bit, so it's okay to pull off kind of the very end of that process. That way my coils are thicker and look better as a vortex rather than all of a sudden going like down to this tiny little pinpoint that ends up not looking as good as you want it to. All right, recone. This one has become long and skinny, so we are going to change it to be short and fat. Short and fat. I went ahead and grabbed my two pieces of glass for the shelf. Heat it up, set it in those. Always do the big one on top, little one on bottom. Remember not to melt that in completely before you go back to coning your piece down. And now we've got those attached real nice. So next, we're going to heat this up, roll it in the frit like we did before. And we're going to do that 3 times, same as we did last time, because it turns out that's what I need to do. That is 2. And 3. So now I'm going to recone my piece for the last time. This is the one that's the most important. You got to remember, because this is the last time you're going to have the opportunity to shape your cone. And now take your black, and we're going to cover up everything we've done so far. Start thin, right around the edge. Get thicker as you move towards the skinny part of the cone. Should have used a larger rod for this. That's okay. Now take your time and really let it gather. And then I usually push in a little extra color right at the end of the piece, just to kind of, again, further protect the tip of my cone. All right. So now that we got this down, I'm going to go ahead and half marble it, and then we'll do our back pattern. All right, so that is nice and spherical. All the texture's gone, stuff like that. So now we're going to add our pattern. So this one's going to be different than the last one. Where the last one we did stringers and did lines all the way around and manipulated those. This time we're going to take dots and then swirl them together. So I want the dot pattern to kind of, I don't know how to show this in the camera, but start here and go around to the back of the piece. So we place our first dot right kind of on the edge of where the clear is, and then slowly, very slowly, start descending the piece as we go around. It is super easy to descend too quickly, and then it does not look like a spiral. It's just like a it's just like a U, like an extended U, and that is quite obviously not what I'm trying to do. So make sure you descend carefully. And we're working our way to the very center of the piece. And the center of the bottom should be the last dot should hit the very center bottom of your piece. So now we want to melt these in. You want to melt them in almost completely without using the mold. If I use the mold right now, it's going to smush them. So rather than the blue underneath them kind of spreading to allow them to sink in, it's going to overlap on the blue, which brings the dots closer and isn't what I'm trying to do, so don't do that. That's like, there are times when I want that look. This is not one of those times. All right, so now we've taken the time to melt them in for the most part. Now we can go ahead and use this to manipulate them a little bit. And so now I have a whole bunch of caramel dots going down my piece. So next I want to take red, and this is going to be a striking red, so it's kind of a smooth red. And I'm going to put that in the center of each of my caramel dots. This is a pretty exacting process. You have to really hit the center. You don't want to do any kind of overlap or anything. If you do, it will look like crap. Just like that, all the way around. And now, again, spend the time to melt them in without manipulating them too much until they're already nice and melted. And you can keep doing this. That's the number that I'm going to do for this because I know how that looks, and that's a really cool look with those two specific colors. But this is just called dot stacking, obviously, because I'm stacking dots. Yeah, we really stretched for that technique name. But you can keep doing this. You can stack dots on top of dots on top of dots on top of dots. And it will, as long as you do it artistically and with point, it will look cooler and cooler the more dots you do. All right, so now I want to drop everything real quick. So now we're going to first pull this black down to a nicer point, and then I'm going to swirl each of those colors or each of those dots together. And so what I'm doing is I want to heat both the dots that I'm going to swirl and the spot right between them. Get all of it nice and hot, nice and moving, and then set my rod between the two and twist. And you see that? So you can kind of see there how it twists them together. And then we're going to go to the next set of dots and do the same thing. After I twist, you see me blow on it and then I'm moving it around. I'm trying to get this to detach without taking any glass with it or leaving a bunch of glass behind. So by blowing on it, you're rapidly cooling a very specific point, and that causes that glass to want to separate and crack a little bit easier. And so I'm using that to facilitate the separation of my rod from my piece. Now the other trick with this is if your dots are get kind of close together, which happens because you're going under the first line of dots as you spiral down, you have to make sure that you don't heat it so that you accidentally drag some of that third dot up. That will ruin your look. So you got to be very careful with how you heat, where you heat, and all that stuff. And this is also a time, if your dots took a sudden swoop or something like that, this is also a point in time when you can make that look a little bit more natural by taking the outside of where that swoop happens and using that as your grab point. And then it'll look, in the total project, it'll look a lot more natural than rather just like circle, drop for no reason. That happened. That's why I mentioned it. Whoops. Don't blow out your flame. All right, that's all of them. So now that has twisted all the way around with like little spirals of color. Caramel looks like caramel. I mean, it's a very self-explanatory color. But then on top of that will be this nice kind of vibrant red. So it'll look good. It's gonna be nice. All right, so now we're gonna melt all that in, run it through the mold. Make sure it's nice and smoothed out. Now on this one, the dead center is actually a dot of red, but I don't want that dot of red to overlap anything, so I don't want to use a red pointed handle. So we're just going to use a clear handle and just attach it a little bit softer than we normally would to avoid obscuring the pattern as best we can. And then we'll let that cool for a second longer than we normally need to. And now, again, hit that spot right where the color and the clear meet. However, on this piece, because our back is a little bit smaller than our last one, we want to make sure that we angle it so that the flame goes away from our point that we just put in. And I'm actually going to hit this spot right where the color meets the clear with the pin flame, gather it up a little bit, and that way it'll make the rest of the process go just a little bit smoother. Again, you have to be very careful not to overlap your color with your clear at this stage specifically. All right, so now it's pushed out so that I don't have to worry about it. So I'm just going to gather up my clear. And the lens is going to be a little bit big on this one just because my back color is a little bit smaller. But that's kind of the nice thing about the 1-inch marble, or any marble really, if it has a lens, is you can pretty much always add more glass onto your piece to get it up to an inch. All right. So now we've got our lens. So now we'll tap that off, melt in the bottom, get this all to be one cohesive marble. Looks like I may have added just a little bit too much lens. But luckily I can remove some with ease in a little bit. So the back pattern looks real nice. It stretches out a little bit as you add that lens and kind of push it out, so it ends up looking real nice. Okay, that is essentially done. Yeah, that's good. All right, so now we're going to take off our big handle. Always be careful. Sometimes when you go to put your handle on, it will have a tiny little thing left over from your previous application of the handle, like a little bit of color. Make sure you tap that off, because there's nothing worse than like accidentally adding a tiny bit of blue to the very bottom of your piece because you put your handle happened to have some blue on it, and now everything looks a little weird. All right, go ahead and pull that off. Now, again, this marble was a tad bit big, so I don't want to add anything to it. So I really want to make sure I take off this bleb that was left behind basically completely. You also don't want to create some kind of weird divot on the top of your piece that you then have to spend 10 minutes fixing. It's better to have the marble be, 1.1 inches rather than spend an extra 20 minutes trying to get it down to exactly 1 inch. I really don't think that anyone would care if it's slightly larger. All right, so now you really have to spend some time getting this to marble out. This one's a little oblong, which can happen, but by the end of the process, changing the axis and everything will get it back to a good, proper shape. I'm using a little bit more force when I do this, and that is also how you get it to go from being oblong to being a proper marble shape. So really force it to be. Or I guess convince it wants to be is a little bit better description of the process. Make it an offer it can't refuse. All right, so now we're going to change the axis. The vortex looks real nice. Got the whole thing heated up. Run it through the mold. And that's pretty much it. It is now definitely in a good shape. So I'm going to let it cool for a second and then take it off with a 4mm handle thingy. Remember, super weak seal on that handle. Let that cool for a second, and then we'll tap it off and toss it in the kiln. Piece looks nice. You can see the back pattern better than you can see the vortex right now. Okay, awesome. All right, we're gonna toss that in the kiln. Give me 30 seconds. I gotta get some water, go to the bathroom, and then I think we're going to do a flower, like a rose marble, which will be real nice. One sec. Okay, sorry about that. So, we are going to do a rose. So the first thing I want to do is pull the stringers for what are going to be the petals of my flower. I'm going to use a really kind of bright, vibrant red. A lot of times I'll use a slightly darker red, but this is what I'm feeling today. This is what we're going to do. So I want to pull the stringer a little bit skinnier than I normally do, just because the more petals that I can put into this flower, the better it'll look in the overall. So I want to make sure that these are nice and skinny so I can lay down just a ton of them. Start heating up the section, loop it, and smush it so there's no air. Heat that up and twist. Get that into a ball. Once it's all nice and balled up, super hot, ready to go. Pull. And I'm pulling a little harder and faster than I normally would because I want this to be a skinny little stringer. Oh, hey, Chantel. How are you? Thanks for joining me. Yeah, the rose marbles are some of my favorites. I mean, I've been making them for like 10 years, so obviously I don't hate them. Okay, and then I also need the leaves. Normally I would do jade. It's a nice bright green, but jade can get a little cracky at larger and deeper encasement. So if I'm putting that really deep into a marble, which is pretty much what I'll be doing, it can check. And checking is a form of crack that it's not like the piece cracks all the way through and is now, you know, you can just it's two pieces. Checking is where the individual color will have these like spider cracks that'll go all over them, and the piece itself will stay intact most of the time, and you just have all these little spider cracks around that color specifically. And jade green does that. It's a great green for a million things, and absolutely horrid for some. So I'm going to use forest green instead. It's a darker green. It's a good color. These ones do not need to be as crazy thin as the petal, because these are going to be the leaves of my rose. Yeah, basically. So the length of my arms very much dictates the length of the stringer. It's also a matter of like how much of a piece of color I can pull into a single stringer at a single time. If you have shorter arms, you just don't try to pull as much of a stringer. But yeah, I can pull like a 6-foot stringer. It's ridiculous. And I'm like out like this, trying to do it and making sure the glass is like right next to my nose, trying not to burn myself. And then you try to like have to lean down all awkwardly to get it to slice on the flame. So you have 2 usable size stringers. So yeah, it's a thing. All right, so imagine Zach. Zach could pull like a freaking 8.5-foot stringer. It'd be incredible. I'm gonna hire him just to pull my stringers so that I'll get some extra efficiency out of the deal. So now I'm going to gather up my clear. So on this piece, unlike the last one, the base of your piece, the size of your piece, is determined by your initial gather. So I want a 1-inch piece, therefore I need to have roughly a 1-inch initial gather of clear. So this is going to take a minute. If you have any questions, now's the time I can ask them, because this just takes a little while. You can't. There's no rush in it. You just got to let it gather up on itself, kind of Zen glass that. Yeah, what I'll do is I'll teach Zach to pull a stringer and then have him come pull like a 9-foot stringer on air, and then we'll measure it and see exactly how large that can be. For those of you who do not know Zach, who is a good friend of mine, he's like 6'10" or 6'11", just absurdly tall man with these arms that reach for days. So in the process of pulling stringers, that man may be God. So during your gather here, you got to kind of be careful to keep it nice and straight. It'll have a tendency to want to dip to one side or the other during the process, and you just have to encourage it not to do that. A lot of times I feel like glass is just a matter of like tricking the material and the material to do what you want it to do. Like it won't, it's doing its thing. You just have to be super persuasive and convince it that its thing that it's doing is the same thing you want it to do. I do not anthropomorphize my glass at all. Okay, so that's probably pretty good. We are now going to stamp it flat. And in addition to stamping it flat, I'm going to, sorry, I'm like cleaning off my graphite. I got frit all over. I'm going to smush it with my glass smusher. And when I smush this, I want to try to make sure that the center, my rod that I'm holding is as centrally located on the disc as is physically possible. Make my life a lot easier. So we got our disc. Now we're going to take our super tiny stringers, and we're basically going to be making little C's and intertwining them all the way around the piece. So you can kind of see what I'm talking about a little bit, sort of, not really. They start small, and you can enlarge them as you move forward on your piece. But the real trick is you kind of want them all to be super close to each other. That way you're getting the maximum amount of pedal space available on your disc. It'll still look fine if they're separated and they're real far apart, but it will look much better if all of your leaves or petals of your leaves are like super close together. All right. So that's all of our petals. You can kind of see how they go down like that. Yeah, again, it's going to be it's difficult with the webcam, but basically, that's the pattern. That's kind of what you're trying to do in red on the bottom of your disc. Okay. So next, you want to add your leaves. Leaves are just squiggles all the way around the outside, and you want there to be a good amount of separation between squiggles so that you have distinct leaves. And again, these can be much thicker. It's not a big deal. They'll actually probably look better if they're a little bit thicker. So you have very distinct leaves. Like that. You can kind of see how it wiggles there on the edge. And you're doing it on the very, very inside edge or outside edge of your clear. Okay, so now is the insanely long process of now turning this into a marble. The first thing we're going to be doing is I'm trying to melt all of my color into my clear without letting my color boil, especially because I'm using red. Red is a particularly boily color that, yeah, end of statement. It's just a boily color. It likes to fry out on you, and It looks horrendous when it does. So you have to gently, with the right flame, in the right spot in the flame, melt those in so that they'll adhere to the clear and stick in, go into the clear real nicely without boiling. That's also building up the heat base of your piece so that you can implode everything. Like I said, takes forever. There they go. Now they're starting to melt in. That also means that our clear glass is at a movable temperature. They won't start to melt in until the clear is probably 1600 or something, but it's whatever temperature it is that causes the glass to start to cave. So from this point forward, what I want to do, holding it this downward angle like I am here and rotating. Yeah, everything in glass. So Chantel said this is a much more drawn out process than she realized. Everything is. There's no just doing this or a quick that. Everything is like 6 different processes that you didn't realize had to happen before this piece was created. So like right now, what I'm trying to do, keep the angle down, focus my heat on the rim of the piece, and it's going to form a cup. I don't know if you can see that, but it's kind of a little bit. You can sort of see it, but it forms a cup. And with a flower, I want that cup to form, and then I'm going to set it on the graphite, and that causes all the color to go in to the center a little bit and up and out just a little bit each time I do it. So we do that many, many times, and that causes the glass to push its way into the clear and out and around, and that's what kind of creates the flower. That's the visual thing that you're looking for. So you're basically doing this thing backwards and inside out. And that's pretty much how it feels with most glass. You always feel like you're doing things backwards and inside out to get the work that you're looking for. So like I can write people's names and stuff in glass, but when you do that, you make a bubble, and then with a stringer, you write their name backwards. And so then when you sink it in and around, when they view it, it will now be viewed forwards. So in real life, where I don't write things down very often at all, I ended up suddenly finding myself writing certain letters backwards because I'm more used to drawing them backwards in glass than I was actually like writing them correctly on paper. So weird hazard of the job they don't let you know is going to occur. How do I know how many times to smash it? You don't really. It's much more of a so I guess the simple answer is once the green lines have gone into the clear and are no longer on the surface of the glass, which is a really abstract concept because it is still very much on the surface of the glass. It's just difficult to explain. But basically, once the green has become leaves, then you're done. But more than that, it's a matter of like, now it looks how it's supposed to look, so I'm done. And that's kind of how that works. So if a beginner was doing it and they had no idea what proper looks like, then once the leaves and the green that's on the outer rim of your piece pushes into the piece, you're probably done. However, once you've done a lot of them, that's not always 100% true. Sometimes your leaves will go in, and if you stopped right then, when you pull the color out, so it's all the colors only on the inside, you will end up pulling your leaves out, and then you don't have any leaves on your piece. So it's not a super easy question to answer beyond like when it looks right. Like that's that's kind of it. And the smashing also, you're not pushing down. You're basically trying to make the cup on the inside flat. And as you gather this up, that will actually mean that there's quite a chunk of clear above the cup that's already solid that doesn't get moved at all. So, and you don't want it to get moved, because then rather than getting a nice push, you will flatten your flower petals and they'll get thin and they will look bad. So even that press you have to do delicately and to a specific spot and point, or it will ruin your flower. I don't normally do a ton of these live on air because this part of the flower does genuinely take quite a while. So we're probably 2 to 3 bench presses away from it being finished. This is the only kind of bench press I do, for those who actually know me. So as always, all of these products will be up on my Facebook. Follow me there at Vulcan Glass Art Studio. They will be on my Instagram. Follow me there. That is at Vulcan Glass Art. And then if you want to support the page further, check us out on Patreon at Vulcan Glass TV. And then also make sure, like the video, subscribe, all that stuff to the YouTube Vulcan Glass TV. I'm only 970 subscribers away from this actually becoming profitable. So, hey! And so this is also why I don't usually do 2-inch flowers. This process in 2 inches, with 2 inches of glass as opposed to 1 inch, takes like 3 times as long. It's like exponentially longer based on how large your piece is. But you can kind of see how it's pressing into the center instead of reaching all the way to the outer edge like it was when we first started. So now that my piece is getting thicker, I can focus my heat a little bit more on the edge and not just the cup to get the edge to scoop over and form that cup. That way it will actually increase the speed with which my leaves will get pressed into the piece. And in the end, this is what I'm going to want to do to get it down to a true marble shape before I pluck out the color out the center and make sure that our piece is completely finished. Okay, so now you can see how you can kind of see how the color is taking up a much smaller space. There we go. In the center of the piece. That's what we're trying to achieve. We're trying to shrink the space that the color work is all the way down. Because the more it's shrinking down, that means the more of it is going up into your marble. And this is no longer straight, even a little bit. There we go. All right, so I think we have one more. One more time of stamping it down, and everything will be ready to pluck the color out the center and finish the marble up. So this is called imploding or compression. There's like 4 different names for it. I usually call it an implosion. And the cool thing about this technique is using it almost exactly like this with more specific color application, you can achieve absolutely astounding results. The guy who I kind of idolize who does this technique is John Kabuki. He is a Japanese glass blower on Team Japan, and Team Japan is like, there's this coalition of glass blowers from Japan, and they are some of the best in the world. Japanese glass blowing tends to be characterized by minute patterns, so they're never going to do a flower like this. If they do a flower, it's going to have 600 petals. Each of those petals are going to be like 14 different colors, and it's going to have taken them, 20 hours to make the piece, and it sells for $4,000. So like it's a much more, but the marble itself, the piece that's made, is still only going to be 1 inch. It's just going to have an absolutely asinine amount of work in that 1 inch marble. And so there's one of them, John Kabuki. He actually makes these like little people. They look like they have Raiden hats, and they'll hold little opal batons in their hand. And so they're like little ninjas inside the glass. And it's cool. Like, they're so cool. They go for like $900. So, I'm never going to own one. Unless you get like the random thrift shop find of the coolest marble ever. But this technique can go really far, and you can end up creating some really, really, really cool stuff if you master it, which I haven't. I would consider myself to be decently okay at it. All right, last press. Perfect. All right, so now we got our leaves in there. We got our flower bursting out real nice. Everything is all pretty. So now I want to condense this marble down as much as I can and let that cup shrink. So it's now like this little hollow piece, and I'm going to stick a piece of glass in there and pull it out. So now I'm changing. I must smash my face on this mic like every time that's why I don't have a mic. So for those of you who joined me, first and foremost, I didn't have sound because my mic wasn't hooked up, because I can't leave it here when I blow glass, or I just like smack my face into it repeatedly. But now I'm kind of focusing my heat much more on the bottom of the piece and less on the side, because I want that cup to close, and I want the the color that's on the inside bottom of that cup to be extremely hot, so that when I reach in there with a piece of 4mm or whatever, I can just pull it out real cleanly and it'll all work well. Okay, so now you can see the cup is, well, no, you can't. And I can't really show you because then it's going to take me forever to heat it back up. But the cup is very small now, so I'm going to drop down to a pin flame. Woo! Fall over while I'm doing it. Focus that pin flame on the inner part of my cup, reach in with my rod, pull it out. You have to be careful not to do this too soon, because if you do, you can pull your leaves and your petals and stuff down, And so then your piece will have this weird divot in the center that looks horrible. Okay, so now it's going to be a little hard for you guys to see, but that at the bottom there, that little thing sticking out, there's going to be a whole bunch of color that is on the outside of the glass, and you'll see it and you can feel it in a final product that's not 2,000 degrees. And so what I want to do is pull all of that away and make sure that the only color that's left on your piece is color that's on the inside of your marble. All right. So now we have that. Shape is horrible, like super flat. And now is just the process of actually marbling it out. Now, because you have this kind of oblong disc, you don't want to just heat it up and then like force it in the mold to get it to be a marble. You want to let it heat itself and start marbling a little bit on its own. Otherwise, you can flatten your flour a little bit to where when you look at it, it's not a totally round flour. It's like an oval flour. And you don't want that because it looks bad. Unless you do want that, then it looks fine. I don't know. But I don't want that, so I'm not going to do that. So when I reach in with the rod, I'm doing a few things. Yes, I'm pulling everything down to a point, so it'll come to a nice pinpoint at the bottom of your marble. You're also, again, like I said, making sure that the color is only on the inside, because if you run your finger over a piece that has color poking on the outside, you'll feel it. It's rougher than glass should be. So you have to get rid of that to make sure that the feel of the piece is right. And then you're also, it's the only way you can close that cup. Like I'll never be, well, not never, but it's very difficult to close the cup if you don't pull it down to a point. It just takes forever. So pulling it down to the point is taking your cup and making it flat so that then you can melt it into everything else. So this one's a little small. So what I'm going to do is when I get to the point of taking it off of this handle, I'm actually going to add some of this handle to the top of the piece to make a lens. You can't add too much or it will flatten your flour on the inside, but you can add a little bit just to increase the overall size of the piece a tad. So give it a second to cool so you can actually see what's going on a little bit. Yep, I don't know if we're going to get something that you can see. Yeah, no way. We're not going to be able to do that. So this is a take my word for it. Everything looks amazing and awesome, and it's the most beautiful thing in the world, and you should buy it right away. I'll have pictures of this up on the site tomorrow, and you can kind of see how this all came out. So now I'm going to add a handle to the bottom. I can use all clear handles now because the piece is completely clear. So unlike the Vortex marbles where I have to adjust the color of my handle to match whatever the backing of my piece is, this one we just use clear. So now I'm adding a tiny amount of excess glass to the top here. When you do this, you run the risk of creating what I called earlier the kind of invisible line. It's a distortion that's caused by two layers of clear overlapping on each other rather than melting into each other. It's weird. It's difficult to explain, and it took me a long time to figure out what the hell was causing it and how to avoid it. So when you do things like this and you're adding a little bit of clear on the outside, you basically have to heat it up until rather than it being curve bump, it becomes swoop. Once it's all swooped, then you will not, when you put it through the mold, you will not create your little optical crease that you don't want. Yeah, I'll get them all up tomorrow. That's the one downside. I'm going to be contacting. So in glass, there's like one guy that does glasses, like the lenses. He's the best. You buy things from him if you know what the hell you're doing. So I'm going to contact him about seeing if there's any kind of like lens or something, or just even just a plate that I can stick in front of my camera to get the same effect that my glasses give of cutting out the soda flare, so you guys would actually be able to see what's going on. But I don't know if that's going to be possible or not. We tried just sticking glasses in front of the camera, and it totally didn't work. Like not even a little bit. So we'll see. But that's a goal that I'm not sure if we'll meet or not, but we'll give it a shot. All right, changing the axis. Make sure we get rid of that mark left over from the first handle. Run it through the mold. So the handle that I put on is actually pretty... nope, I lied. I was going to go through this whole spiel about how awesome this handle was and how I could just tap it off without going down to a 4mm. And I was wrong, and I'm not going to do that. Don't rush things. Life lesson, glass blowing lesson. All right. So let's see. Can you guys... I mean, like a little bit. But you can kind of see how it's in there, how it bursts up, right like that. Like I said, once it's nice and cool and the colors actually show up, it's gonna be a really nice one. This is gonna be a nice flower. Glad I didn't cheat and skip this step, because that handle was not as awesome as I thought it was. And there we have it. Let that cool down. Get rid of that last scar. So this is one of the two kinds of flowers that I do. This one's a little bit more work than the other one, but I also think it looks a little bit better. Like it's a cool like rose carnation look to it. Tap tap. Get your handle off. Get rid of the scar, and I can toss that kiln, and it's on to the next one. Okay. My list of stuff I'm supposed to do. We're gonna do a vortex with dicro. I've got some dicro warming in the kiln, so I think that's the next project. Okay. I'll use this. So, I have yet to successfully make a 1-inch dicro vortex marble. I've made like 1 5-inch and 2-inch. So I'm gonna shoot for 1-inch, but we'll see what happens. So as you can see, one of the interesting things about glass as an actual art form is there's not really, you don't take breaks. It's not like painting where I'll paint some stuff and then I can go elsewhere and do an additional thing and then come back. Glass, you can do that on larger pieces and to an extent on some work. You can stick it in the kiln and then come back. But for the most part, glass, you just go. You start your piece and you continue to work until that piece is finished, especially with marbles and stuff. With marbles specifically, the big part of it is building your heat base. And once you've built your heat base, if you let it cool down, it just takes so much longer to make the piece. So say I'm halfway through that marble. Say I push the lens on and I don't feel like finishing up the shaping. If I stick it in the kiln, it's going to take me 10 minutes of just heating it to get it back up to temperature. So I have to be, you got to have a really good reason to spend that extra 10 minutes, especially because when you figure glass, every minute that you're working is resources being expended. It's money being spent on gas and oxygen and stuff. So you want to work efficiently and quickly and start to finish on most pieces. Come here. Okay, so now we got our cone on our little piece there. And so I am going to add some dicro. With my dicro glass, I want to make sure I find which side has the film and which side has the clear, and only ever heat the side with the clear. Never hit the film with the flame. We're going to get my cone nice and hot and then kind of set it on there. Just like that. So now, once I make sure it adheres nicely, I am going to cut the rest of this dicro off. And that can go elsewhere on my bench to be used later. Now I want to carefully make sure that the top layer of clear overlaps the layer of dicro. So you heat up along the edge and kind of roll your tweezers, and that forces clear glass over your dicro. Dicro is ridiculously finicky. I mean, red boils, but like dichro fry is like nothing else. Like it wants to fry. It's like it feels like its whole point in existence is to fry and ruin your piece. That's what it lives for. So you got to make sure you take every precaution to not let it do what it wants to do most. It's a very suicidal material. Okay, so now that we got our little dichro strip on there, I'm going to cone this. And I think I'm going to put a second strip of dichro. Yeah, I'm gonna put a second strip of dichro over the first one, just to get an extra oomph to that dichro look. I also have extra dichro that's heated. Yeah, I know. That's. I mean, it's always going to be reproducible. I'm just doing it because I'm afraid if I put one layer of dichro, since the main purpose of this piece is the dichro, that's the focal point. If I only put one layer, it's going to be less than I want it to be, basically. Plus, I'm not adding anything to the process mid-piece, so I want to make sure my cone is the right size. That being said, this is probably also going to turn out to be like a 2-inch piece, because everything I do turns out like that. Cut the dichro off and then roll the edges again. Yeah, that's going to look better. Takes longer, making the piece a little bit more expensive, but I think in the end, it's going to look a little bit nicer. And since the whole point of art is to be pretty, let's make it as pretty as possible. Okay. So now we're going to cone it and then add frit to the outside. That's going to give basically anything that is not dichro is still going to have some kind of like interest to it. Yeah, the second piece of dichro goes directly on top of the first piece of dichro. And that literally means that when you're looking down the piece, you're looking at dichro through dichro. So it's going to make the sparkle much more prominent. And that's why I did it. Whereas if I just had the one layer, it's possible that during the course of twisting it and doing all the stuff that I do, that dichro layer is going to get thinner, and that makes the sparkle a little bit less prominent. So if you remember the pieces that I did with the multicolor dichro, where it kind of went from like a yellow up to a blue, but the dichro wasn't super shiny, that's because I only put one layer of dichro in there instead of two. And I think from here on out, I'm probably always going to put 2 layers of dichro on top of each other for this kind of project. I think it looks better. Okay, I was totally supposed to twist this before I put the frit on, so hopefully it'll still look fine. Focus your heat on the thick spot, not the thin. whole thing twist. All right, so I was supposed to twist that before I put the frit on the back. So this piece has now walked into the realm of it's either going to be unexpectedly awesome, to where I will now do this product like this from now on. It will look okay, which means that I can sell it, but will never repeat the process, or it will look terrible, which means I'll probably give it away and have to make the product again. We shall see. All right, got our nice short fat cone with all of our work in there. And now we are going to cover it with black. Normally, the other color I like to use to cover things is blue. But I don't have any, and I need to make some sales before I can buy more blue. So everything's getting black today. So it looks like some of my dichro fried, but it looks like it fried on the back level, so it may not be noticeable in the final piece. This is going to be one of those awesome pieces where nothing went quite right. It didn't go disastrously, so like my piece won't explode or anything, but it might not look as good as I want it to. Or it might look more awesome than I could have possibly imagined. Glass has a tendency to be like, every once in a while you make a mistake and it's like, so we're going to reward that mistake with a product that you can now sell for 50 years. Just FYI. So we'll see. If I'm lucky, that was the mistake that got made. So now we're going to melt this in, marble out the bottom half, and then we're going to go ahead and add our back pattern. So for this piece, our back pattern is going to be a starry night one, not like the Monet or Van Gogh, Monet, Starry Night, but it's just going to have stars and a moon. That's the goal. It does look like I'll be able to make this a 1-inch marble. So at least I succeeded without screwing up on that front. So, yay. Silver linings. All right, awesome. Now I got this in the right shape. I didn't prep this, so I have to go find my frit while this piece is hot, which is always fun. Okay, so we're using 3 different frits. I'm using a large star white for big stars, fine star white for little stars, and a little bit of double amber purple for, we'll call it nebula dust. It adds a little purple to the thing. It looks cool. I like it. So I'm doing it. So I'm mixing that up on my graphite. I'm going to heat the back of this up and just kind of roll it. Was it Van Gogh? Okay, Van Gogh Starry Night. So I want to put this on in a fairly random pattern. I don't want it to be like stars. I want it to kind of have speckles here and there. So that's why I rounded it first so that I can't possibly roll it flatly in the frit. Perfect. So you can't really see. It's a very small amount of frit that actually got that actually adhered to the piece, and that's what you want. I don't want this to look like the center of the Milky Way galaxy's starry night. I just want it to be like if you looked up in a place with light pollution, what you would normally see. So now we're going to add our moon. I'm going to do a double amber purple moon. The first thing we're going to do is put a dot. I don't want to do this in the center. That way, if I do it in the center, sometimes my handle will mess up my moon a little bit. I don't want to do that. So just pick a spot, and you're going to put a pretty nice big dot of double amber purple in it. Just like that. Now we're going to melt that in. Okay. And now we're going to take some black and we're going to offset the cover of, by covering that first dot with the second dot in a sort of offset way. And what that's going to end up doing is giving us the crescent to make our moon look like a crescent moon. So we place that dot kind of on the side going towards the center of your piece, of your first dot. And then I'm going to press it towards a little bit more as I heat it up into the piece to give it a nice, distinct crescent moon shape. Can you see that? Not really. So we have to melt that in. And I don't want to hit this with the marble mold at all until after that's completely melted in. Because if I shift that black dot in any way, the only possible thing that it can do is screw up my crescent moon. So you really want to make sure you spend the time to melt that in. Moon looks pretty cool. A little skinny. That's okay. All right. That's a little skinny, but it's cool. I like it. So, next step. We're going to go ahead and make our lens. Again, because there's all kinds of frit and stuff on the bottom and it's not a clear, obvious black, I'm going to use a clear handle. If you use a black handle and you end up putting it in the center of frit like this, if it leaves a little chunk of black behind, it will look weird. It looks like there's a hole in your night sky. So you don't want to do that. So putting the lens on is the exact same as it is for everything else. This lens is going to be a little bit closer to a 50% lens, I think, mainly because I want this to be a 1-inch marble. That's really the high and low of it. I really want this to be a 1-incher, so I don't want to increase the size of my lens to the point where it becomes a 1.25 or whatever inch marble. Obviously, it doesn't matter. Like, people aren't going to like, well, if that was 1 inch, I'd buy it, but it's 1.25, so I'm not going. Like, no one cares. But like a lot of glass, there's kind of this like self-pursuit of perfection. You always have to try to make your piece look as badass as is physically possible, because 90% of people aren't going to notice if like one little thing is wrong, or my favorite one of it's the imperfections that make it like show you that it's art and that it's handmade, when I'm over here like, dude, I'm trying to make this as like no imperfections. Like, the goal is perfection. So like, my goal is to make this piece look like it was made by machines, I guess. So it doesn't matter from a sales perspective, but a lot of times you should put in the effort yourself to make sure something looks as good and is as awesome as you can physically make it. That way, even the subconscious parts of why someone likes your piece that they don't really understand, you will have achieved. So do good work, whether or not people notice it. It's a little big. After that whole spiel about like, I want it to be perfect, it's definitely not. It's like 1.1. Maybe not. No, it's good. It's totally good. It's absolutely 100% perfect. It is exactly 1 inch. It is precisely what I wanted it to be. No mistakes whatsoever. So awesome. I would like to thank everyone who's joining me. I think we hit a stream high of like the number of people that I've had join me on stream at one time. So hell yeah. Thank you. All right, handle. I'm gonna take off the thick rod. Kind of moment of truth. Ooh, that handle sucks. Better handle. Oh yeah, that's awesome. Okay, so I don't know if that's gonna be like a this is now how I'm gonna do all of these, but it's gonna look good. It's a good one. All right. So now I pulled off the bleb because I didn't want this to be any larger. I don't want to gather any glass into it. I want it to stay the same size. So now we just got to marble it out a couple times and get this to its final shape. So the back of my marble feels a little weird. I guess maybe the frit didn't quite melt in all the way or whatever, so I'm going to spend a little extra time. I'm still going to change the axis. I'm going to change the axis to a less extreme degree than I normally would. and then make sure we hit the back of this piece enough to where any additional imperfections and texture and stuff will go away. Okay, all set there. So now we will do our little handle. I'm actually super happy with this one. Now, because I didn't change the axis to such an extreme degree like I did on the others, that also meant that this handle is now closer to where I laid my last handle than I would normally like it to be. So I have to be extra careful not to let my heat travel up to my skinny ass little handle that I've got going on there. I want to just heat that spot specifically where the other handle was, so that I can get it to melt in without causing my other handle to adhere too much. And we are going to call that awesome. So, hell yeah. So I'm going to let this cool for a second. I don't know if you're going to be able to see the Dichro that's like doing all the stuff on the inside, but I figure I'll let it cool for a second and then maybe. So let's see here. You can see it a little bit. You can kind of see how it coils down in there. It's a real nice spiral. There's the back. This is definitely going to be one of the ones you're going to want to see. Take a look at the pictures that I'm going to post tomorrow. For anyone who has not heard me say this the first like 13 times I did, if you want to see these products, I'm going to have photos of them up on my Facebook at Vulcan Glass Art Studio and on my Instagram at Vulcan Glass Art. I was doing video slideshows of them, but I feel like that's cluttering up my YouTube page, so I don't think I'm going to do that anymore. But you can see all of this work. I'll do photos in the morning and get that posted up on there. So, yeah. All right, toss that in the kiln. Okay, so while I was doing that piece, I decided that my last project for today is going to be a 2-inch vortex marble. So we're going to try one of those, and I might die during the process. And if I do, then everyone gets to see a glass blower kill themselves on air. So, hey, lots of fun. All right. So because it's a 2-incher, I have to use a fairly large larger. We're using that. Got to use a really large rod. Normally when I would make these, I'd probably end up using a larger than 12. I think this is 12.5. I'd probably use like a 14 millimeter rod, but I don't have that. So we're just going to use a lot of 12 millimeter rod, and it'll totally work. It'll be fine. I also have one large opal left, so I'm going to use that as well. And don't worry, Mom, this is one of the ones that I'm not going to be reproducing. I'm just gonna make it. So having the large opal, my last large opal, there shouldn't matter. Okay, so same process as last time. Get your opal in there, make sure you heat the bottom, let it stick, and then slowly work your heat base up the tube to encase your opal without catching any air bubbles. Again, take your time. This stage in particular, you catch one air bubble and like, again, maybe the customer doesn't care and maybe they won't, you'll see it forever. Anytime you ever look at that piece, you'll see the air bubble that's sitting underneath your opal. So forget the customer for sake of your own glass blowing sanity, or at least my glass blowing sanity. I will always make sure that we do our best to avoid getting any kind of bubbles adhered to our opal. Sweet. Okay, so now I got the opal all set. So this piece is a little more awkward to make just because I'm holding such a ridiculously long rod. But you have to. Otherwise, when it comes to pushing your lens in, you're going to end up like burning the hell out of your hand. Which I've done many times. Like, there's nothing worse than, reaching the end where you just have to push another inch of lens. Like, very clearly, one more inch of glass pushed into the lens will make this piece look perfect, but you only have like 6 inches of glass that you're holding on to. So you just kind of let your hand fry while you try to finish the piece. So to avoid that, I'm using a nice large rod because I don't feel like having a bunch of people watching me burn the hell out of myself on air if I can help it. If I can't help it, hey, enjoy the show. But we'll make the attempt. So now on this one, because it is so much larger of a piece, you want to make your cone at the bottom quite a bit larger. Yeah, end of statement. Everything has to be bigger, but you want to be careful not to make your cone section where all the work is too small, because if you do, then you end up with like having to put like 3/4 of the thing being a lens, and that can actually obscure your vortex a little bit if you have too much lens. Your vortex will look good from certain angles, and then from every other angle it will kind of look a little ridiculous. So you want to make sure that your base piece is large enough, your base cone is large enough to where you don't have to do that, and you can still maintain that 1/2 to 2/3 a lens on your vortex marble. Now, unlike the last marbles where I attached a little bit of a 6mm and just kind of gathered it up, on this one I'm going to attach a 10mm below my opal and actually take a piece of the 10mm off and then work it into a cone, so that I have the amount of glass that I actually want to work with, which is quite a bit more. It's because I've lived near or right like with you for most of my life, Ma. I don't even know if I have my own thoughts anymore. I think it's just shit that you would normally think. And I just say it like really crassly and swear more. Okay. So now we're going to gather up that section below the opal. Be very careful not to include the opal in your cone. It's easier to include it in this project that on a 2-incher by accident than it is to do it on a 1-incher. It also matters more because on a 1-incher, if it's sunk into the lens a little bit, what's a millimeter? It doesn't really matter that much because you have a very small product. On a 2-incher, if it sinks deeper into your cone, it can actually get really heavily obscured by the design of the whole thing. And worst case scenario is it gets pulled on that twist when you twist your piece, and then all of a sudden your opal's not in the center, it's off to the side. Again, probably something that normal humans don't care about, but I want the opal to be nice and centered in the lens, front and center, looking good. So you got to spend the extra time to make sure that that's what occurs. You can make lots of really cool stuff by randomly doing things, but at least to me, and I'm sure this is not what people in modern art think, um, deliberately creating beauty is far more important than accidentally creating beauty. Um, Lots of people can accidentally create something that looks really cool. Creating something that looks really cool because that's the thing that you were trying to create has a lot more point to it. So that's always the goal, is to create the purposeful awesomeness. Okay, cone. You can see it's not huge, but it's quite a bit bigger. Saw blade. Go ahead and put your bubble thingies in. Yeah, we're going with thingies. That's the technical term. I'm rocking it. We're getting towards the end of the stream. It's when my talking stops sounding so purty. All right, now we're going to take our blue. We have a better blue. I don't know that I do. Oh, sweet. I'm just going to throw everything everywhere while I'm doing this. Okay, I found a blue. So this is cobalt blue, standard cobalt blue. What I was using before was a light cobalt blue, and they just look a little different. It's not. Oh wait, I'm supposed to zoom this first. Know your steps. So the cobalt blue is a little bit darker, and so on the curve of the vortex, it's going to show the fume a little more distinctly, and it's also going to ripple out a little bit more noticeably when you do the shelf rocks that go in there. Sweet. Okay, now we put the blue on. Again, only over the bubbles. And you want to put a thin layer. You don't want this to be real heavy. Especially because it's a darker blue, I don't want to lay it on crazy thick because I do want some of its transparency to still be noticeable. So now I'm getting rid of the excess fume, burning that off the clear section of my piece. Come here. Okay. Now we're going to do our twist. Yeah, cobalt, so fun history lesson. In glass, cobalt was actually the first color of glass ever discovered. Prior to cobalt, everybody just had clear glass. And then all of a sudden, and I'm 99% sure it's in Venice, and if there's a glass blower in the chat that's like, no, it's this, that, or the other, you're wrong, let me know. But I'm pretty sure that the Murano glass were the first people to discover blue glass. So at a time when all the other glass blowers in the world, in Germany and in the Middle East, were still working with strictly, man, this thing does not want to coil properly. They were working with strictly clear glass. You had Murano making these beautiful fluted blue vases and stuff, which was one of the things that led to them being the glass capital of the world. And it was also one of the reasons that it was punishable by death to leave the island of Murano. For those of you who don't know the history of glass, glass has been done in many different places around the world. There's actually, so they had these places in the Middle East where you would have the glass masters and then you'd have the apprentices. And the apprentices, they'd dig a huge hole in the sand in the middle of the desert. And the apprentices would put this big marble pot filled with glass and just run wood. They would just run wood for like a week. And all of the glass blowing masters in the area would congregate around this big pot in the middle of the desert. And they had these like leather pants, so they would just like wear these really thick leather pants, and they would dip in with their rod and get glass, go back, sit down in the sand, kind of like on their haunches, and make stuff on their pants out of glass. Soft glass, obviously, less temperature than what I'm working with, but yeah, they would roll out their bracelets or whatever the hell they were making, their jewelry, and that was how they blew glass, which was nuts. But however, in Murano, which is basically in Venice and Italy, they became really good at blowing glass. Like that was like one of their main exports. And so they took all of the glass blowers that they had and shoved them on an island, Murano, in the middle of the ocean. So now I'm putting the two rocks that are gonna be our shelves on there. And it was punishable by death to leave that island. And there was a few reasons they did that. One, kiln technology was not super awesome at that point in history, and so if the kilns blew up, at least they would only blow up one island instead of lighting the entire town on fire and causing a huge incident. So that was the one practical thing, and then the other was that because Murano glass was one of their main exports, they did not want people going out and teaching the secrets of how to make Murano glass to competitors and stuff. So that's what led to Murano being kind of the glass capital of the world and where all of the glass blowers were. And that's why still to this day, Venetian glass, Murano glass, is considered to be the best of the best. And so it wasn't until I think as late as the 50s and 60s that glass blowers started leaving Italy and teaching glass to other parts of the world, which is also why, like, if you take a look at the best glass blowers in the world, the real famous ones that people know, like Dale Chihuly and Lino Tagliapietra, they're all still Italian because glass blowing hasn't been done heavily outside of Italy for very long. It's still very much an Italian thing, and the secrecy of glass kind of went over into the mentality of glass blowers, even us pipe makers and stuff, where generally when you find a technique, like when you figured out a product, no. So she asked if Murano glass is Boro. No, it's not. All Murano glass is soft glass. Boro was actually invented in America by Corning. So, and that was done, I think, in like the 1950s or 60s. So Boro is an incredibly new art form that is almost entirely American. Germans use Boro also. Certain German companies use Boro, but primarily that is an American thing. Murano is soft glass. But it went over into the mentality of glass blowers to where, you know, when you find a technique or you figure out a thing, we tend not to tell anybody. Like, I figured out this chainmail, how to make glass chainmail, and I'm not ever going to do that live on stream. I'm just not, because I don't want anybody else to know how to do that, because that's my thing. But that's kind of the mentality throughout glass, is this whole like, well, I mean, I learned it, I don't want to tell you. And so one of the most notable exceptions was actually fuming. So the frying the silver onto my piece the way I did, what that does in the pipe world, when you smoke through it, it'll change color. So you'll have a piece that starts out as kind of a yellow, and then as you smoke through it, it'll eventually turn a real cool blue. And the guy who discovered that, his name is Bob Snodgrass, and is basically considered to be the grandfather of the pipe industry. I met that dude at Champs. It was awesome. I got to shake his hand, and he told me that my chainmail was very cool. So, but he discovered that the silver fuming will actually change the color of glass. And rather than do the stereotypical glass blower thing and keep it to his own damn self, he decided to do the hippie thing and tell everybody. And to be totally honest, fuming, color change pipes, and Bob Snodgrass were the main reasons the glass industry and the pipe industry specifically really kicked off. It was almost exclusively due to him. So, yeah, it's not always a bad thing to share your techniques. That being said, if you want to learn to make glass chainmail, do it yourself. I'm not teaching you. I'm not doing it. Okay, so I actually used cobalt blue also on the outside of the piece. So rather than the black that I had on my prior two marbles, this is going to have a really cool cobalt blue backing. So it's going to be really pretty. I think I'm going to do the dots that spiral around with the twist as my background. It's a background that I like more than most, so I'm going to do it. So you can see the back of this is very clearly like significantly larger than the back of the 1-inchers. Proportionally, it should be roughly the same amount of back to amount of clear percentage-wise. So yeah, that's the goal. Oh, I'm totally gonna make it all the way to 7 this time, because this marble is not done. All right, so now I'm trying to shape it down to a marble shape, and then I will add my pattern. I think I'm going to do caramel with double amber purple on the outside instead of the red strike like I did on my last one. Double amber purple tends to show up. It literally sounds exact. It shows the colors. Like the name of the color is the description of how it looks. It creates ambers to purple. Everything from amber to purple. And then I guess double it? No, it's just they have regular amber purple that doesn't show up as much. Double amber purple can get pretty extreme in certain applications. This will be a pretty good application for it, theoretically. So I figured out my first two t-shirts are going to be theoretically with a mini, and then tap tap, which is going to have just a marble and me tapping the little, because I guess I say those all the time. All right, so now we're going to go around and place our dots in a spiral going down to the end of the piece. I basically, for the first 2 to 3 dots, don't even reduce the angle at all, because I've found that it's, like I said, it is super easy to accidentally reduce the angle too much, and you don't get a spiral. It just kind of looks weird. It is also equally possible to not decrease your angle enough, like I did in the last piece, and then it doesn't spiral properly. So you have to kind of hit that happy medium where your dot angle is such that it looks good. I can tell I'm getting to the end of my stream because my descriptions are turning from like technical to like, this look a purty, so I do it. And that's, still totally what happens, but All right, so now we want to melt those dots in. Remember that you want to melt them in almost completely on their own before putting it into the mold, because you do not want them to change shape at all. It's very important that they do not. And my hair is all falling out, which happens after I work for a couple hours. All right, so now we're going to take the double amber purple, and each dot, we're going to put a dot in the center of the dot. Again, be very precise with this. Make sure your dots are in the center of the previous dot. Don't overlap at all. If you do, it will look like poop. Try not to knock things over with your super long, ridiculous rod also. Okay. Melt it in again, and then we're going to do the twisty. All right, sweet. So now we're going to take our blue rod that I've lost. And we're going to do the same thing we used the old black rod for. You see me hold that up to the light. So black and blue. There is no actual black in glass, not a true black. The only two ways that you make black are either an insanely dark blue or an insanely dark green. And so a lot of times things will look black. Like this rod looks, I mean, even when you look at it right now, it looks black. Like that's black. But when you hold it up to the light, you can see the light go through it, and it's clearly a cobalt blue. So you have to be kind of careful because, like, I have this tube that I made that I honestly just I keep around to show people. Do I have it? So this was this beautiful black and white tube that I was trying to make. And then that piece right there in the center is actually Dragon's Eye, which is like a dark green psychedelic random color. So while I was making that, I picked up the color and it looked like black, so I thought it was black. And then I pull it down and it turns out that it was Dragon's Eye, and that tube is now like basically useless. So you have to keep track of what colors are what. I have a whole system down here of all my different colors are labeled. And then I have one empty spot. It's not empty at all anymore, but it was originally empty, designed specifically for colors that I have no idea what they are anymore. So anytime I find a glass rod that I'm like, are you black? Are you blue? Are you green? Like, what are you? I just toss it in there. So, and then when I have students and stuff where the color doesn't matter so much because they're making their first twisty bead, I go into that, and that's where I get all my colors from, so that I feel like I'm not wasting colors. And it's the same thing with a lot of other colors, like amber purple and double amber purple and triple passion look almost identical. There's a few browns that are like, they look like amber purple, but they don't strike, so they have no colors that show up. It's just brown. So I use it thinking that I'm going to get some crazy strikes, and it's just brown. So I'm like, okay, well, that wasn't what I was aiming for. So lots of different colors look freaking identical, and you have to be very careful not to use the wrong color. So for instance, in this circumstance, if this had been black and not blue, at the center of each twist, where all of my color spirals around itself, it would just have these random black dots in the center of that would look super weird. And so it's important to use the same color as your background for your little spirally thingies, majiggers. Two more. All right. Now we'll melt all that in, make sure that it's textureless, and then on to the part that is basically hell. Not as bad on 2 inches than it is on 3 inches. Someday I promise I will do a 3-inch marble on stream. It's going to be a short stream because it's just going to be like the 45 minutes or whatever it takes for me to make a 3-inch marble. And that's it, because I don't have any energy to do anything after I do a 3-inch marble. Plus, it's going to be an adult stream, so you can listen to me screaming and swearing and just generally pissed off. 3-inch marbles are made with hate. Just pure anger and hatred. All right, so now we're going to go ahead and add our handle and start gathering up our lens. Now, the important part of this lens gather is right in the beginning. It is super important, especially on a 2-inch marble, that you take the time to make sure that that section where your clear and where your thin clear and your thick piece meet is super melted in. You do not want to create a crease in a 2-inch marble, mostly because 2-inch marbles are hard and take forever to make. But it's easier to do due to the size of the back versus the size of the rod that you're using for your lens. It's actually pretty easy to accidentally fold something over. So you got to spend a little bit of extra attention making sure that right at the beginning this doesn't fold and that it gathers into itself properly, which now it has. So turn the flame way up and spend 6 years gathering glass in. So we're going for a 2/3 clear to lens to work on this marble. So that should get it to about 2 inches, maybe a little bit smaller on like 1/8, 1/9, but hopefully we'll get all the way to 2 inches. And when I'm done, the rod that I'm holding right now will probably be like super short. Like it'll probably burn a little bit to work on this piece when I'm all the way done with it. So you can already see right now it's probably at about 1.2. This is the average size for the small marbles. And this is also when the clear is going to start slightly umbrellaing, which is totally not a word, over the color. So you'll have this big clear dome, and it looks kind of like a mushroom over your color work. And you, in the next step, I'll kind of show you that you do have to take extra care to make sure, again, that you don't accidentally fold the glass or cause it to ripple on itself. You have to make sure that it gathers into the rest of itself properly. Also wearing glasses that don't fall down when your face gets sweaty, super nice. Kind of wish I had thought of that ahead of time. The other thing you need to remember when working on big pieces like this is the heat of the torch is not what's causing you really to feel incredibly hot. It is the radiant heat of the piece. A 2-inch chunk of glass sitting at like 2,500 degrees is hot. And it's actually not that far from my body and from my face and all that. So, yeah, this is hot. All right, so I think this one's gonna end up being like 175, but it's starting to give me a little bit of difficulty. So I am going to leave that as the lens that we have. So you can kind of see how massive the lens is versus the actual work of the piece. So once that cools a little bit, we'll tap that off. And now I want to heat the bottom of this piece and get it to gather into get it to gather into the clear. This is also heavy. In case you didn't gather that one. So the way the clear goes is, say the clear's at the bottom, it comes up like this and does that. And again, we don't want this, that angle, we want it to smoothly swoop. And so that's what this heating right now is doing, is it's getting rid of that angle and causing a nice smooth swoop. And then when I put it in the marble mold, it'll actually probably recreate that angle, and then I have to do that again. And you do that a couple times until you get your color all the way out without causing it to fold on itself, which is important. Okay, 2-inch marble molds. So yeah, this is going to be a little bit smaller than 2 inches, but not a ton. So you can see again how it created that kind of and then it goes like that. So once again, we have to hit that bottom spot right where that kind of divot crease thingy is, heat that up, get it back to being a smooth swoop, run it through the marble mold again. Looks like this is going to be the first stream that goes over time, because there's no way in hell I'm finishing this in 5 minutes. So, woo! Actually made it to the end. Rotating between my hands changes the angle slightly and also gives one of my arms a rest, because I am a wuss. All right. Created that crease one last time. It's real small now. So we should be able to do this one more time and then run it through the mold one more time, and then we'll have our solid shape. And we can take it off our main rod. And that's also when we get to see if my vortex looks awesome, which it should. Maintaining the vortex in a 2-inch marble is actually a hell of a lot easier than it is in a 1-inch marble, because you can just add more of the background color around the cone, and it doesn't matter if it gets too big. The 1-inch marble, if it gets too big, it will not ruin your piece, but it'll make your whole piece too big. Okay, so now we just want to melt this all in one last time to make sure all of our texture is gone and everything's looking cool. And then we can start the process of taking it off the handle. Awesome. Okay, so now we're going to take it off the handle. I just want to hit the flame one more time, make sure I don't have any cold marked ripples or any nonsense like that. And we'll take a handle. Make sure that there's no color on the handle. Like there was a little bit of blue on that. Wouldn't have really mattered. Don't want it to be there anyways. That was not centered at all. Doesn't really matter, but meh. Making sure that the handles you use are long enough to not burn your fingers. Super important at this stage. Real easy to accidentally put a small handle on here. Now you also have to remember that you want your cold seals to be just a little bit stronger on this project than others, because rather than holding a 1-inch marble's worth of weight on the end of a chintzy seal, you're holding 2 inches marble's worth of weight on a chintzy seal. So careful. Oh yeah, so that vortex is awesome. This is going to be a good one. I'm happy with it. Yay. Okay, so due to how I made this and the care that was taken in making sure it's round, I don't have to change the axis. I want to take extra care to make sure I don't have to change the axis on these, because once you do, it is very, very difficult to control. You can do it, obviously, but it sucks. And so not as necessary on a 2-incher. It's harder for a 2-incher to be out of shape than it is for a 1-incher, in my experience, for me. Okay, so now we're going to do our last handle. This is normally what's going to be our 4mm handle, but because this thing weighs like 1,000 pounds, we're going to do a 6mm handle that we just marvered down to a smaller point. We're just going to attach it on the top here, real weakly. And then again, super careful not to change your, like that seal's bad. That's a bad seal. It's supposed to be. So you want to be real careful not to put too much stress on it during the process of getting rid of that last little bit of bump that's on the bottom. Like you especially have to be careful when you set this in the cup. Just the act of setting it in the cup a lot of times will cause that handle to just be like, nope, I give up, and leave. Let it cool for a second. I don't know if you guys can. I don't know how dedicated I am to letting you see this. Okay, not very dedicated, because this handle's weak and I don't want to like hold it at the angle that I have to for you to be able to see anything. So once that's cooled down enough, set it in the cup, tap, tap. Get your handle off, and then make sure you hit that spot where that last handle was. A lot of times on the 2-inchers, there'll be a much more extreme dent or divot, so make sure you take your time to get rid of that. And then let's see what we can do here. So you can kind of see the opal in there, and then a little bit of the vortex. Whew, okay. So yeah, that's it for today. Thank you guys so much for joining me. We had like a record number of people joining me, and also like you filled a chat. So thank you. When people ask me questions, it makes it so I don't have to talk to myself indefinitely, which is awesome and appreciated. So if you're looking for pictures of all of these products, you're going to check them out on Facebook at Vulcan Glass Art Studio. You can check them out on Instagram at Vulcan Glass Art. And if you want to support the channel further, check us out on Patreon at Vulcan Glass TV. If you become one of our patrons, I will make you cool stuff live on air and then send it to you so that you can have it. Whew, other than that, on July 7th and 8th, check out Champ's virtual trade show. Champ's is one of the largest pipe trade, counterculture trade shows. It's a pipe show in the country. And they have been awesome enough to try to do online virtual shows as a way to support their artists and their buyers during the COVID times. So if you, I think it's free to check it out. So like, even if you're not buying stuff per se, and you're not a wholesale, you don't own a shop, check it out. It's cool stuff. And then I will also post up when all these projects are for the Chicagoland Art Show. I will post up when that art show happens, and you guys can maybe check that out too. So yeah, that's pretty much it. Thank you guys very much for watching, and I hope to see you next time. Have a nice night.